Welcome into the Spit Studios, Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. This is the Spit Sports Show. Now, as the NHL season slowly comes to its close, only about 4 or 5 games remaining from each team, we're starting to see what every team is looking like, streaking, going into this postseason. Now, I am going to today talk about my hometown team, the Vancouver Canucks, because there is no more interesting team going into these playoffs than the Vancouver Canucks. Even in past years, this is one of the most fascinating teams I can remember coming into any postseason in any sport, because despite being one of the best teams in the league throughout the entirety of the regular season and currently being 5th in the overall standings, nobody seems to believe in the Canucks. They are first in their division. They're going to get to play one of these 2 wild card spots, probably. Edmonton has a very far outside chance of catching up to them, but it's unlikely. As the matchups start to come to a head, people are really predicting that the Canucks will be upset in the first round by a Nashville, Vegas, or whatever team is going to be in that first wild card spot. Now, by no means is playoff experience a myth. And that is the main thing that people bring up when they talk about these Canucks not going on a long playoff run, is the fact that they haven't made the playoffs since the bubble year, and before that, 2015. The bubble year is a bit of a weird year, so I'll go back to 2015. But there are other numbers, and I understand the playoff experience argument, because if you look at the last 10 cup winners, there is an extreme wealth of playoff experience for every single one of them. I'm talking 6+ playoff runs before they won their Stanley Cup. The only one who you could argue didn't have just an exceptional amount of playoff experience was Colorado. But even they had made it to the playoffs the previous 4 years before they won the cup, and made it to the second round 3 times. However, that's not everything. Playoff experience by no means is the be-all, end-all in the NHL playoffs. It comes down to your roster, your chemistry, how good you're playing when you're going into the playoffs, how can you keep the puck out of your net. And if you look at the other numbers, stats, trends, there's a lot going for the Vancouver Canucks in terms of their playoff chances. So we all know in the playoffs, it's really not about scoring. It's about keeping the puck out of your net. The games get so condensed. Everyone's playing so hard. You know every team's little nuances, that it comes down to, hey, can I make simple plays to get the puck out of my zone? And can I make sure that their team doesn't get going offensively? Defense wins championships. We know this. And the Canucks have been phenomenal on defense, especially since the All-Star break. They're second in shots on goal allowed since the All-Star break. So their defense has been doing, credit to them, a very good job at keeping teams to the outside, not letting shots get to their goalies. Now, does this have something to do with the fact that Thatcher Demko has been out, and the Canucks probably are trying a little extra hard to not allow shots on their 2 backup goalies? Maybe. But even if that's the case, it's still incredibly impressive that they've allowed the second least shots on goal since the All-Star break. However you slice it. They're also top 10 in shots allowed against teams with at least 42 wins. So against the good teams, even still, and this is throughout the entirety of the season, this isn't throughout the All-Star break, they're not allowing many shots. They're playing really good defense and keeping pressure on their defense by being in the offensive zone. Speaking of playing against good teams, the Canucks have been phenomenal against good teams this year, especially in terms of goal differential. They are number 1 in goal differential against teams with at least 42 wins at plus 22 in the goal differential category, which is so impressive. Made even more impressive by the fact number 2 is Vegas, just one below them at plus 21. These stats were all collected on Sunday, April 7th. So if they've changed since then, I apologize. Vegas is at plus 21. Florida is 3rd at plus 14. And then you go down, and 8th place on that list is even. They're at 0. So it's really hard to have a good goal differential against good teams, believe it or not. And yet the Canucks have the best there is. And a big reason for that is they are top 10 in defensive zone percentage, at getting the puck out of their zone. Now, this is a very nuanced stat, but it means that they're doing a very good job on their breakout and not allowing sustained defensive zone pressures, which is absolutely huge. They're also 8th in face-off win percentage. So when you look at the little defensive stats that really get amplified when the playoffs come around, the Canucks are really, really good in a lot of them. And that hasn't been a sacrifice to their offense at all, because the offense has been absolutely humming with Quinn Hughes, who over the last 20 games especially, and I know he had a hot start, but I think these last 20 games, even if it doesn't show up statistically, he's been even better. He has been the driving force for this offense, the driving force for the power play, which hasn't been playing great, but it's been better than it was. He's been unbelievable. Connor Garland has seemed to find his stride. Just like last night, the whole arena chanting his name when pretty much everyone in Vancouver wanted him out, including Connor Garland before the season, was incredible. And I want to give a quick shout out to Ilya Mikheyev, who, especially in these last 10 or so games, has been showing unbelievable effort and grit on that third line, which is huge come playoff time. So they've been 5th in goals scored since the All-Star break. Their offense has been awesome. They've been 7th overall throughout the season in goals scored. They have the 2nd most goals against teams with at least 42 wins. So again, against the good teams, they're still putting the puck in the net at a rate that is top of the league. They are doing a really, really good job playing against these playoff teams. They are still number 1 in shooting percentage. Now, will that come down come playoff time? Yeah, probably. But still, when you're number 1 in something throughout the entirety of the season, like literally from game 1 to now, I think we're on game 77, the Canucks have been number 1 in shooting percentage. At some point, it's not just a fluke. They take very, very efficient shots. They're 2nd in goal differential above expected. They're capitalizing on their chances and they're stopping the other team's good chances. They're doing a very good job at turning the tables, even if they're given poor situations. And so in a bunch of categories that really, really matter, the Canucks are top 10 at least. But the thing is, all of those stats are just on paper. And it doesn't have to do with the way the playoffs, the standings, the bracket is turning out right now. And when you look at the matchups and what they potentially have to go through and the trends of these other teams, you start to kind of see why any chance at getting beyond the conference finals is pretty minute. Unlikely at best. So teams not only to win the Stanley Cup, I gave you the numbers for teams that won the cup and how much playoff experience they had. They had tons. The least amount was Colorado. But even teams who have made the Stanley Cup final have had a ridiculous amount of playoff experience in the past 10 years. So these are the teams that have had the least amount of playoff experience who have made a cup final in the past 10 years. So Tampa in 2015, they had a very they didn't have a lot of playoff experience, no doubt about it, but they did make the playoffs the year before, and they made the conference finals 4 years before that. Now, it wasn't exactly the same core, but there were pieces from it, and they made the playoffs again the year before. Now, you have the Vegas year, obviously, where they didn't make the playoffs the year before because they didn't exist the year before. And the Habs made the playoffs the year before they made it to the cup final. But again, those are the 3 teams with the least amount of playoff experience and in the last 10 years to make a cup final. So you have Tampa in 2015 who made the playoffs the year before and the Habs who made the year before. In the last 10 years, there has never been a team ever in the last 10 years to make the Stanley Cup final without having made the playoffs the year before. That's just a fact. Vegas didn't miss the playoffs because they couldn't miss the playoffs. So there's history here and recent history that if you don't have any playoff experience, your chances of making the cup final are literally 0. You can and have crazy runs happened. Obviously, Vegas made it to the cup finals the year they were invented, and There have been some unbelievable. The LA Kings were the 8th seed in 2012. I totally understand that, but it's just unlikely. And the only teams to make a cup final without making the playoffs 4 of their 6 years before that cup was, again, Vegas, Montreal, Tampa. So that's 3 of the last 20. Those 3 teams. Only teams to make it to the cup final without making the playoffs 6 of their last 8 years. It's just not good history for the Canucks. And I know I said playoff experience isn't the end all be all, and it's not when it comes to winning a round, when it comes to winning 2 rounds, but winning 3 rounds and definitely 4 rounds. You need some playoff vibes. You need to get a feel for the speed and intensity of the games, because people have described it as it's like playing a back-to-back in the NHL in one night. You need to get a taste of it. And in their last 10, if we're just looking at their team, they're 6-4, and in their last 12, they're 6-6. No one thinks they're playing their best hockey right now. Now, is that important going into the playoffs? I think so. The history shows that it is quite important, although there have been some outliers who have been ice cold coming into the playoffs and have won the cup, but it's definitely not the best of trends. Add to the fact that Elias Lindholm hasn't been in the lineup for a little while. Him coming back could definitely affect chemistry, especially because the Canucks' lineups have changed more than the direction of the wind in the past year. Like, it seems like they've tried out everything. And listen, I totally understand that. I think Miller with Garland and Joshua has been rolling. I think Lindholm centering the third line was solid before he got hurt. And a million other different line combinations that Rick Tocchet's tried. In the playoffs, though, you need a set 4 forwards, 3 D pairs. You need it to be synchronized. You need chemistry. For me, the playoff lineup would be Lotto line, Petterson, Miller, Besser, and then you got Lindholm with Garland and Joshua, Mikheyev, Bluger, Sutter, Pods, Lafferty, 4th line, whatever. But will that be what they run in the playoffs? Probably not, because I haven't been right about their lineups at all throughout the entire season, if I'm being totally honest. I've been dead wrong about what they're going to do. Also, this is a very important stat, and I gave plenty of important stats as to why they might do well, but like I said, the number one most important thing in the playoffs is keeping the puck out of your own net, and they're decent in a lot of defensive stats. One of the most important defensive stats is goals against per 60 minutes. They rank 29th. It's not great. And listen, they're probably, like I said, I want to look at what they're doing in their matchups. So they're probably playing against the Kings, the Preds, or the Knights. Those 3 are kind of in lockstep, 3 points separate them. The Blues are 5 points behind. They have an outside shot, but probably not. So against those teams, they're 2-2 against Vegas. One of their losses, DeSmith played the worst game of his career, and they just won last night against Vegas in an absolute thriller where I thought it looked pretty even throughout. They are 3-0 against the Preds this year, I will say. They're +7 in those 3 games. Only 1 empty netter, so it's not like it's skewed, those stats. And they're 1-2 against the Kings. So in that, one of those was an overtime win. One of those was a 1-goal loss with DeSmith, and one of them they got blown out, 4-goal loss. So if you look at the 3 teams they could play against, how do they match up? Well, they're pretty much just 500 against those teams. It's a coin flip series against Vegas, the Predators, or the Kings if you just go against how they played against. Now, is that how it's going to happen in the playoffs? I don't know. We'll see how the Predators play once the intensity gets turned up, but they have been the best team in the NHL over the last 20 games. Vegas is obviously incredibly scary with Mark Stone coming back off LTIR, and just the fact that they're Vegas. And the Kings, although they're one of the most boring good teams in the NHL, they're still a very good team in the NHL. Division rival who you've seen a bunch. You can't underestimate them. Although that would be the matchup that I would want most if I was the Canucks, even though they went 1-2 against them in the regular season. And even if you look at how they fare against playoff teams, they are 5-5-1 against playoff teams at home, Western playoff teams at home, which is where they're going to be most of the time. They earned home ice advantage, and they're going to be playing at home. They're 5-5-1 against playoff teams at home in the West. They're 10-8-2 overall against West playoff teams. So they're just average. They're just middle of the pack. So all of that leads me to say this. They are a very good team. A very good team. But in terms of their round one series, I say it's a 60-40 split. The Canucks versus whoever they play. In round two, I'd say it's more of a 70-30 to whoever they play against. I don't know who it's going to be. The bracket hasn't been set, but I would not like their odds going up against a Colorado, even without Rantanen, just because they have so much experience. A Vegas, obviously, if they have to play them in the second round. And there's a bunch. A Dallas would be a terrible matchup for them. There's a couple teams who, if they play them in the second round, I think it'd be 70-30, some 60-40, some 80-20, which, again, leads me to say this. I think it's likely, my pick for the Vancouver Canucks' playoffs is they are out in the second round to whoever they play against. That is the most likely, in my opinion. Maybe they make it to the Western Conference Finals. It's possible. I'd say it's maybe, I don't know. It's a possibility, but I'd say it's highly unlikely. And second round, it's going to be tough. Maybe they're out in the first round, but my pick is out in the second round. They have no chance of making it to the Cup final, small chance of making it to the conference finals, and a decent chance of losing round one. Anyways, thank you all so much for watching. Please let me know what you thought down below. What do you guys think the Canucks are going to do in the playoffs this year? What's your prediction for who's going to win the Cup, period? Who do you have as the Hart Trophy winner is an interesting question that I've been thinking about recently. Might make a video on that. Please let me know in the comments below. I am small enough as to where I can read and respond to all of the comments, which I love doing, so keep sending those in. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Peace out.